The rain had been falling for hours when I heard the knock. Not the confident rap of a friend or the hurried tap of a delivery driver, but something hesitant, almost apologetic. I paused the documentary I'd been half watching and glanced at the clock on my laptop screen. 9:47 p.m. Who shows up at this hour on a Thursday night? I lived alone in a second-floor apartment in one of those quiet neighborhoods where nothing much happened after dark. The kind of place where you knew your neighbors by their footsteps on the stairs and the sound of their keys in their locks. Safe, predictable, solitary, exactly how I liked it. The knock came again, softer this time. I padded to the door in my socks and checked the peephole. The hallway light had been flickering for weeks, casting everything in an amber uncertainty, but I could make out a figure hunched against my door. Tall, dark hair plastered to his head, shoulders shaking slightly. I couldn't see his face, but something about the way he stood, defeated maybe, or just exhausted, made me turn the deadbolt without thinking. "Jesus, you're soaked," I said as the door swung open. That's when I saw who it was. Marcus Chen, from college. We'd been in the same political science program, though we'd barely spoken beyond the occasional nod across a lecture hall or awkward small talk during group projects. He was one of those people you notice but never really know. The type who always seemed to have somewhere important to be, always surrounded by a rotating cast of friends and acquaintances, always just out of reach. But standing there in my doorway, water dripping from his jacket onto the worn carpet, he looked nothing like the confident guy I remembered. His usual easy smile was nowhere to be found. Instead, his dark eyes held something I couldn't quite name. Vulnerability, maybe, or just bone-deep tiredness. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I know this is weird. I wouldn't have come here if I had anywhere else to go." He was shivering now, and I stepped back automatically. "Come in. You'll catch pneumonia out there." Marcus hesitated for a moment as if he might actually turn around and walk back into the storm. Then he stepped across the threshold, and I caught the scent of rain and something else. His cologne, maybe? Or just the particular way he smelled. It was familiar in a way that surprised me, like my brain had been storing that information without my permission. "I'll get you a towel," I said, closing the door behind him. My apartment was small enough that the bathroom was only a few steps away. I grabbed the largest towel I had, soft blue cotton that I'd splurged on during a rare moment of self-care, and returned to find Marcus still standing exactly where I'd left him, as if he didn't want to drip on anything. "Here," I said, holding out the towel. Our fingers brushed as he took it from me. Just for a second, just long enough for me to notice how cold his hands were, how they lingered against mine a beat longer than necessary. He must have noticed it too, because his eyes flicked up to meet mine before he looked away, suddenly very interested in drying his hair. "Thank you," he said, his voice muffled by the towel. "I mean it. I know this is—" "It's fine," I interrupted, though I wasn't entirely sure it was. Having Marcus Chen in my living room felt surreal, like finding a celebrity in your kitchen making coffee. "What happened? Are you okay?" He lowered the towel and I got my first good look at him. The years since college had been kind to him, I thought. He'd filled out a little, lost some of that boyish sharpness around his cheekbones. His hair was longer now, falling across his forehead in a way that made me want to brush it back. But there were new lines around his eyes, and something in his expression that hadn't been there before. "My car broke down about 6 blocks from here," he said. "Dead battery, maybe, or something worse. I called a tow truck, but they can't get to me until morning." He paused, running the towel through his hair again. "I was walking around looking for somewhere to wait it out when I saw your name on the mailbox downstairs. I remembered you mentioning you lived in this neighborhood during senior year." I was surprised he remembered that. We'd been assigned to the same group for a final project on municipal government, and I'd complained about my commute from this part of town. It had been such a throwaway comment, the kind of small talk you make to fill uncomfortable silences. "You've been walking around in this for 6 blocks?" I gestured toward the window where the rain was still coming down in sheets. "I tried calling a few people first," Marcus said quietly. But it's been a while since I lived here. Most of my friends have moved away, or he trailed off, shrugging. Anyway, I know this is presumptuous, but I was hoping maybe I could crash on your couch for the night. I can pay you, or don't be ridiculous, I said quickly. Of course you can stay. Let me get you some dry clothes. I was already heading toward my bedroom before he could protest. The truth was, I was grateful for the excuse to step away for a moment. Having Marcus here was throwing me off balance in a way I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just the surprise of it or even the awkwardness of hosting someone I barely knew. It was something else, something that made me hyper-aware of every movement, every word. I dug through my dresser looking for something that might fit him. We were roughly the same height, though he was broader through the shoulders than I was. I settled on a pair of gray sweatpants and an old college t-shirt that had always been too big on me. When I returned to the living room, Marcus was standing by my bookshelf, studying the spines with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was genuinely interested rather than just making polite conversation. His wet jacket was draped over one of my dining chairs, and I could see the outline of his shoulders through his damp shirt. "You still read poetry," he said without turning around. I blinked. "You remember that? You always had a book with you in Professor Martinez's class, usually something I'd never heard of." He pulled out a slim volume, Mary Oliver, one of my favorites, and turned it over in his hands. "I always wondered what you got out of it." "What do you mean?" He looked at me then, and there was something almost shy in his expression. "I mean, you always seemed so, I don't know, self-contained, like you had this whole inner world that the rest of us couldn't see. I used to think the poetry was part of that." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I'd had no idea he'd been paying that much attention to me. I just like the way poets see things, I guess. They notice stuff that other people miss. Marcus nodded slowly as if that made perfect sense to him. He slid the book back into its place on the shelf. "I always envied that." "Envied what?" "The way you seemed so comfortable being alone, like you didn't need anyone else to make sense of the world." There was something wistful in his voice that made my chest tighten. I held out the clothes I'd brought him, suddenly needing to change the subject. "These should fit you okay. The bathroom's right down the hall if you want to change." Our fingers brushed again as he took the clothes, and this time I was sure it wasn't accidental. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary before he nodded and headed toward the bathroom. While he was gone, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Marcus Chen was in my apartment, wearing my clothes, planning to sleep on my couch. The same Marcus Chen I'd spent 2 years secretly watching from across lecture halls and seminar tables, fascinated by his easy confidence and the way he could make anyone laugh with just a few words. I'd never imagined he'd even remember my name, let alone show up at my door looking lost and asking for help. But there had been something different about him tonight. Something quieter, more uncertain than the person I remembered. The way he'd hesitated in the doorway, the careful way he'd asked for a place to stay, the wistful note in his voice when he talked about being alone. It was like seeing him without his usual armor. I heard the bathroom door open and busied myself straightening the couch cushions. When I looked up, Marcus was standing in the hallway wearing my clothes, and the sight of him hit me like a physical blow. The sweatpants hung low on his hips, and the t-shirt was just snug enough to hint at the shape of his chest and arms. His hair was towel-dried and messy, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Better?" I asked, though my voice came out slightly hoarse. "Much, thank you." He gestured toward the couch. "This is perfect. I really appreciate it." "Are you hungry? I was about to make something for dinner anyway." It was a lie. I'd eaten a sandwich hours ago and had been planning to go to bed soon, but something about the careful way he was holding himself made me want to take care of him, to feed him and make sure he was warm and comfortable. Marcus hesitated. "I don't want to put you out any more than I already have." "You're not putting me out," I said firmly. "Besides, I make too much food when I cook for one anyway." That was also a lie, but it seemed to convince him. He nodded and settled onto the couch while I went to see what I could scrape together in the kitchen. I didn't have much, some pasta, a jar of marinara sauce, a block of Parmesan that was only slightly past its prime. Nothing fancy, but it would be warm and filling. As I set water to boil and heated the sauce, I could hear Marcus moving around in the living room, the soft sound of him settling into the couch cushions. "Can I help with anything?" he called. "Just relax," I called back, "and Daisy, it'll be ready in a few minutes." But even as I said it, I found myself hoping he wouldn't listen. I liked the idea of him in my kitchen, moving around the small space, maybe brushing past me as we worked together. The thought sent a warm flutter through my chest that I tried to ignore. When the pasta was ready, I served it in my two matching bowls, a housewarming gift from my mother that I'd never had occasion to use for company. I set everything on my small dining table and called Marcus over. He sat across from me, and for a few minutes we ate in comfortable silence. I kept finding myself glancing up at him, watching the way he twirled pasta around his fork, the small sound of satisfaction he made after his first bite. He looked more relaxed now, some of the tension gone from his shoulders. "This is really good," he said eventually. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in I don't even know how long." "You don't cook?" He shrugged. "I travel a lot for work, lots of takeout and hotel room service." He paused, stabbing at a piece of pasta. "I keep meaning to learn, but there never seems to be time." "What kind of work do you do?" "Consulting, corporate strategy stuff." He made a face. "It's about as exciting as it sounds." "Do you like it?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I used to think I did. Good money, interesting problems to solve, lots of travel to places I'd never been." He looked up at me. "But lately, I don't know. It feels like I'm always moving but never actually going anywhere, you know?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did know. My life was the opposite of his, predictable, rooted, contained within the boundaries of this small city and my quiet routines. But something in his voice suggested that all that movement hadn't brought him the satisfaction he'd been looking for. "What about you?" he asked. "What are you doing these days?" "I work at the public library downtown, reference desk mostly, but I also help with programming and collection development." "That sounds perfect for you," Marcus said, and there was no condescension in his voice, just genuine warmth. "You always seemed like you'd end up somewhere surrounded by books." "It's not glamorous, but I like it. I like helping people find what they're looking for, even when they're not sure what that is." Marcus smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since he'd arrived. "See? That's what I mean about you noticing things other people miss. Most people would say they help people find books. You help them find what they're looking for." The compliment made me flush, and I looked down at my bowl to hide it. We finished eating in another comfortable silence, and I found myself reluctant to clear the dishes. There was something nice about sitting across from him like this, about the quiet intimacy of sharing a simple meal. But eventually, Marcus pushed back from the table and started to gather his bowl and utensils. "Let me help you clean up." "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. My kitchen was barely big enough for one person, let alone two, but somehow we made it work. Marcus rinsed while I loaded the dishwasher, and every few seconds, one of us would need to reach around the other for soap or a dish towel. Each time we brushed past each other, his hand on my lower back as he moved behind me, my arm against his as I reached for a glass, I felt that same little jolt of awareness. At one point, we both reached for the dish soap at the same time, and our hands collided over the bottle. We both laughed, but neither of us pulled away immediately. His fingers were warm and slightly damp from the dishwater, and I could feel the callus on his thumb where it pressed against the back of my hand. "Sorry," he said softly, but he didn't sound sorry at all. "It's okay," I said, equally softly. We stood there for a moment longer than necessary, close enough that I could smell the fabric softener on my own shirt mixed with something that was purely him. Then Marcus stepped back and the moment passed, but I could still feel the ghost of his touch on my skin. When the kitchen was clean, we migrated back to the living room. I offered to put on a movie, but Marcus shook his head. "I'm not much for TV lately," he said, settling back onto the couch. "Do you mind if we just talk?" I curled up in my armchair, tucking my feet under me. What do you want to talk about? I don't know. Anything. Everything. He leaned back against the couch cushions, and in the soft light from my reading lamp, he looked younger somehow. More like the college student I remembered, but softer around the edges. Tell me about your life here. What's it like? So I did. I told him about my job at the library, about the regular patrons I'd grown fond of over the years. I told him about my morning runs along the river, about the small coffee shop where I went to read on weekend mornings, about the used bookstore where I spent too much money on volumes I didn't need but couldn't resist. Marcus listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like every word mattered. He asked questions, not the polite surface-level kind, but real questions that suggested he was genuinely interested in understanding the shape of my days. It sounds peaceful, he said when I finished. Like you've built something good here. What about you? I asked. Do you have something good somewhere? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands where they rested on his knees. I thought I did. I had an apartment in Chicago. Nice place, great view of the lake, but I was hardly ever there. And when I was, he trailed off, shaking his head. It never felt like home, just a place to sleep between flights. Where does feel like home? I don't know, he said quietly. I've been asking myself that question a lot lately. There was something in his voice, a loneliness that went deeper than just being far from familiar places. I wanted to ask more to understand what had brought him to my door tonight looking so lost, but something told me to wait, that he'd tell me when he was ready. Instead, I asked, "Is that why you left Chicago?" Marcus looked up at me, and in the lamplight, his eyes looked almost black. Partly. I quit my job about 3 months ago. I guess you could call it soul-searching, though that makes it sound more romantic than it is. What does it actually feel like? He considered the question seriously. Like I've been sleepwalking for the past 5 years, and I'm just now starting to wake up. Like I built this whole life that looks good on paper, but doesn't actually fit me at all. I knew something about that feeling, though in reverse. I'd spent years after college feeling like I was supposed to want more, a bigger city, a more prestigious job, a more exciting life. It had taken me a long time to realize that what I had was exactly what I wanted, that there was nothing wrong with choosing quiet contentment over grand ambitions. So what are you going to do? I asked. I don't know yet. I've been staying with my parents while I figure it out, but he grimaced. That's its own kind of complicated. They keep asking when I'm going to get another job, when I'm going to settle down, when I'm going to give them grandchildren. All the questions I've been asking myself, except they want definitive answers. And you don't have those. Not even close. Marcus shifted on the couch, drawing one knee up to his chest. Sometimes I think about just getting in my car and driving until I find somewhere that feels right. But then I realize I don't even know what right would feel like. We talked like that for hours, our voices growing softer as the night wore on. Marcus told me about the job he'd hated but been too afraid to quit, about the relationship that had ended badly 6 months ago, about the growing sense that he'd been living someone else's idea of success rather than his own. I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about. The loneliness that sometimes crept in during long winter evenings, the fear that I was missing out on something by choosing such a quiet life, the way I sometimes felt invisible in my own contentment. I used to think you had it all figured out, Marcus said at one point. In college, I mean. You always seemed so sure of yourself, so comfortable with who you were. I was terrified most of the time, I admitted. I just got good at hiding it. Really? You never seemed scared that I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't belong there, that everyone else knew some secret about how to be an adult that I'd never learned. I shrugged. I think that's why I kept to myself so much. It felt safer. Marcus was looking at me with something that might have been surprise or maybe recognition. I never would have guessed. You always seemed so self-contained, like you didn't need anyone else's approval. Maybe that's what I was going for, I said. If you don't let people close enough to judge you, they can't disappoint you either. But doesn't it get lonely? The question hit closer to home than I expected. I thought about my quiet evenings, my solitary meals, the way I sometimes went entire weekends without speaking to another person except for brief exchanges with cashiers and baristas. Sometimes, I said honestly, but lonely felt safer than rejected. Marcus nodded slowly as if that made perfect sense to him. I think I did the opposite. I kept myself so busy, surrounded myself with so many people, that I never had to sit with the quiet long enough to feel lonely. But now, he gestured vaguely at the space around us. Now I think maybe I was lonely the whole time. I just never let myself feel it. We fell into silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty, charged with all the things we'd said and all the things we were still thinking. I found myself studying his profile in the lamplight, the slope of his nose, the curve of his mouth, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He said it would be just one night, but something in his voice told me he didn't want to leave. I didn't want him to either. The thought surprised me with its intensity. I barely knew this man, not really. We'd shared one evening of conversation, one simple meal, a few moments of unexpected honesty, but something about having him here felt right in a way I couldn't explain. Like a piece of my life I hadn't known was missing had suddenly clicked into place. I should let you get some sleep, Marcus said eventually, though he made no move to get up from the couch. I'm not tired, I said, which was mostly true. I was tired in body. It was well past midnight and I had work in the morning, but my mind felt wide awake, buzzing with the newness of his presence. Me neither, Marcus admitted. It's been a while since I've had a conversation like this, where someone actually listens, you know. I did know. Most of my interactions these days were pleasant but surface level, friendly exchanges with coworkers and patrons, brief chats with neighbors in the hallway. It had been months since someone had asked me what I really thought about something, since I'd felt seen in the way Marcus was seeing me now. You can stay up as long as you want, I said. I don't mind. Marcus smiled, and I caught a glimpse of the charm I remembered from college. Not the practiced charisma of someone working a room, but something warmer and more genuine. Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I really do mean it. You don't have to keep thanking me. I do, though. You could have turned me away tonight. Most people would have. Most people wouldn't have remembered my name from a group project 4 years ago. I remembered more than your name, Marcus said quietly. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, thoughtful, maybe, or uncertain. What do you mean? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. I remembered the way you'd get this little crease between your eyebrows when you were concentrating on something. I remembered that you always sat in the third row, never the front or the back. I remembered that you had this notebook with a blue cover that you wrote in during every class, and I used to wonder what you were writing that was so much more interesting than whatever the professor was saying. My heart did something complicated in my chest. You noticed all that? I noticed you, he said simply. I always wondered what it would be like to talk to you. Really talk, I mean. Not just the polite small talk we made during group projects. Why didn't you ever try? Marcus shrugged, but there was something almost vulnerable in the gesture. You seemed so self-sufficient, like you had this whole rich inner life that you didn't need to share with anyone. I didn't want to intrude. I thought about all those afternoons in lecture halls, all those times I'd caught myself watching him from across the room, and then quickly looked away when he glanced in my direction. All those moments when I'd wondered what it would be like to be part of his easy, confident world, never imagining that he might be wondering similar things about mine. I used to watch you too, I admitted. During Professor Martinez's class especially, you always seemed so comfortable, like you belonged wherever you were. That was mostly an act, Marcus said with a rueful smile. I was convinced everyone else was smarter than me, more sophisticated. I figured if I acted confident enough, maybe no one would notice that I was making it up as I went along. Were you really? Mostly. I mean, I worked hard, I did well in my classes. but I always felt like I was one wrong answer away from everyone figuring out that I didn't actually know what I was doing. It was strange to think that we'd spent 2 years in the same program, both of us feeling like imposters, both of us too afraid to reach out to the other. I wondered what might have been different if one of us had been braver, if we'd found a way to connect back then instead of now, years later, in my quiet living room with rain still pattering against the windows. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? I asked. If we'd actually talked back then? Marcus considered this, his head tilted slightly to one side. Sometimes, especially tonight, sitting here with you, it feels like he paused, as if searching for the right words. Like maybe we were supposed to know each other all along, and it just took us a while to find the right moment. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in the atmosphere of the room, not quite tension, but a new kind of awareness, as if we were both suddenly conscious of all the space between us on the furniture, all the things we weren't quite saying. I was about to respond when Marcus suddenly yawned, covering his mouth with the back of his hand. Sorry, he said, looking embarrassed. I guess I'm more tired than I thought. You should get some sleep, I said, though part of me wanted to keep talking until the sun came up. Let me get you some blankets. I went to the hall closet and pulled out my spare bedding, a pillow, a couple of blankets, sheets for the couch. When I returned to the living room, Marcus was standing by the window looking out at the street below. The rain had finally started to taper off, though I could still see drops on the glass catching the light from the street lamp outside. Looks like the storm's passing, he said without turning around. Yeah. I set the bedding on the coffee table and joined him at the window. We stood side by side, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and watched the last of the rain fall through the amber circle of light below. I should call the tow truck first thing in the morning, Marcus said. Get out of your hair. You're not in my hair, I said quickly. I mean, you don't have to rush off if you don't want to. I don't have any plans tomorrow. Marcus turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the window, his expression was unreadable. Are you sure? I don't want to overstay my welcome. You're not, I said, and I meant it. The thought of him leaving in the morning, of returning to my quiet routines and empty apartment, felt suddenly unbearable. Stay as long as you need to. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I was acutely aware of how close we were standing, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to count his eyelashes if I wanted to. The air between us felt charged with possibility, with all the things we weren't saying. Then Marcus smiled, soft and grateful, and something else I couldn't quite name, and the moment stretched like taffy between us. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. You're welcome, I said, equally quiet. We stayed like that for another beat, just looking at each other in the amber light from the street. Then Marcus stepped back, breaking the spell, and I busied myself with arranging the blankets on the couch. This should be comfortable enough, I said, fluffing the pillow. The couch is longer than it looks. It's perfect, Marcus said. Better than most hotel beds I've slept in. I showed him where the extra towels were, how to work the finicky lock on the bathroom door, where I kept the coffee and mugs in case he woke up before I did. All the small courtesies of hosting someone, though it felt like more than that. It felt like welcoming him into my space, into my life, in a way that surprised me with its intensity. Good night, I said finally, lingering in the doorway to my bedroom. Good night, Marcus replied. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, my blanket draped over his shoulders, and he looked so right there that it took my breath away. I closed my bedroom door and got ready for bed, brushing my teeth and changing into my pajamas with the kind of careful quiet you use when you're not alone in your space. It felt strange and wonderful at the same time, knowing that there was someone else in my apartment, someone breathing and existing just a few feet away. I lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of Marcus settling in for the night, the creak of the couch springs, the rustle of blankets, the quiet pat of his feet as he got up to use the bathroom. Normal domestic sounds that should have felt intrusive but instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. I'd expected to lie awake for hours, my mind spinning with everything that had happened, everything that had been said and implied and left hanging in the air between us. But instead, I found myself drifting off to sleep with an ease that surprised me, lulled by the knowledge that I wasn't alone in the dark for once. I woke sometime in the middle of the night to the sound of movement in the apartment, soft footsteps, the quiet whisper of someone trying not to make noise. For a moment, I was disoriented, caught between sleep and waking, not sure what I was hearing. Then I remembered. Marcus. He was here, sleeping on my couch, and now he was up and moving around in the dark. I slipped out of bed and padded to my bedroom door, opening it just a crack to peer into the living room. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight coming through the windows, but I could make out a figure standing in the kitchen. Marcus. He was shirtless, wearing just the sweatpants I'd given him, and even in the dim light I could see the lean lines of his back and shoulders. He was standing at the counter with his hands braced against the edge, his head bowed as if he was thinking about something. I should have gone back to bed, should have given him his privacy and his space. But something about the way he was standing, so still, so solitary, made me step out into the hallway instead. The floorboard creaked under my foot, and Marcus turned around, his eyes finding mine in the darkness. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Did I wake you?" "It's okay," I said, moving closer. "Can't sleep?" Marcus shook his head. "I keep thinking about everything. Tonight, I mean, this whole conversation we had." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I can't remember the last time I talked to someone like that. Really talked, you know." I did know. I was feeling the same thing, like something had shifted between us over the course of the evening, something significant and fragile and new. "It's too quiet in here," Marcus said after a moment. But not in a bad way. I wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his voice suggested it was important. "What do you mean?" "I'm used to noise," he said. "Traffic, neighbors, the hum of hotel air conditioners. White noise, I guess. But this," he gestured at the space around us, "this quiet feels different, like it's full of something instead of empty." I thought I understood. My apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the hollow quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of contentment, of a life that was small but complete. And maybe, with Marcus here, it was the quiet of possibility. "Can I stay?" he asked suddenly. "Just one more night?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure either of us was ready to examine. But looking at him standing there in my kitchen, his eyes soft and uncertain in the dim light, I knew there was only one answer I could give. "Yes," I said simply. "Stay as long as you want." Marcus smiled then, a real smile, warm and grateful, and something else that made my chest tight with unnamed emotion. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. We stood there for a moment longer, just looking at each other in the amber darkness of my kitchen. The quiet stretched between us, full of promise and possibility and all the things we weren't quite ready to say out loud. Then Marcus stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin in the cool air of the apartment, close enough to see the way his eyes caught the faint light from the window. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night," I replied, my voice catching slightly on the words, and as I watched him turn and walk back toward the couch, his figure disappearing into the shadows of my living room, I felt something settle into place in my chest. Something that felt like recognition, like coming home, like the first note of a song I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or what it would mean to have Marcus in my space for another day, another night. But standing there in the quiet darkness of my kitchen, listening to him settle back onto the couch, I knew with absolute certainty that I didn't want him to leave. Not tomorrow, not any time soon, maybe not ever. Part 2. I nodded, quietly. The simple gesture felt heavier than it should have, weighted with implications neither of us was ready to name. For a while, we just stood there in the dim light of the kitchen, two people lost in the same kind of silence, breathing the same air, existing in the same fragile moment that felt like it might shatter if either of us moved too quickly. The streetlight outside cast everything in amber, and I could see the way it caught the curve of Marcus's shoulder, the line of his collarbone, the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. He was so still he might have been carved from stone, except for his eyes, which never left my face. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell him he didn't need to keep thanking me, but the words felt too loud for the space we'd created between us. Instead, I just nodded again, and after another long moment, Marcus turned and walked back toward the couch. I should have gone back to bed then, should have returned to my room and tried to sleep and pretended that nothing had changed. But I found myself following him into the living room, drawn by something I couldn't name. Marcus had settled onto the couch, the blanket pulled up to his waist, but he was sitting up rather than lying down. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and something passed between us, a question maybe, or an invitation. "Can't sleep either?" he asked softly. I shook my head and moved closer, perching on the edge of the coffee table so I was facing him. We were close enough that I could have reached out and touched him, close enough that I could see the way his pupils had dilated in the dim light. "I keep thinking," I said. "About what?" "About how strange this is, having you here." I paused, trying to find the right words. Not strange in a bad way. Strange in a way that feels like something I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "I know what you mean," he said eventually. "I've been thinking the same thing, like maybe I didn't really get lost tonight. Maybe I just finally found where I was supposed to be." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening, like a knot I'd been carrying for years without realizing it was there. "Can I?" Marcus started, then stopped, looking uncertain. "What?" "Can I sit with you? I don't want to be alone right now." It wasn't really a question about sleeping arrangements, and we both knew it. It was about proximity, about the basic human need to not be alone in the dark. I moved from the coffee table to the armchair, and Marcus got up from the couch and settled beside me, the blanket draped over both our shoulders. The chair wasn't really big enough for two people, but somehow we made it work. Marcus's shoulder pressed against mine, warm and solid, and I could feel the gentle rhythm of his breathing. We sat like that in the amber darkness, saying nothing, but everything was in the silence. All the loneliness we'd both been carrying, all the quiet hope we were afraid to voice. "This is nice," Marcus said after a while, his voice soft and drowsy. "Yeah," I agreed. "It is." I don't know how long we sat there. Time seemed to move differently in the dark, measured not in minutes but in heartbeats, in the gradual relaxation of Marcus's body against mine, in the way his breathing slowly deepened toward sleep. At some point I became aware that he was watching me. I turned my head slightly, and our faces were suddenly very close, close enough that I could feel his breath against my cheek. "Hi," he whispered, and there was something almost shy in his voice. "Hi," I whispered back. We looked at each other for a long moment, and I was struck again by how different he seemed from the confident college student I remembered. This Marcus was softer, more uncertain, but also more real somehow, like he'd shed some protective layer and was showing me the person underneath. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said quietly, "about choosing quiet contentment over grand ambitions. I think I've been afraid of quiet my whole life." "Why?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because quiet means you have to sit with yourself, with whatever you're feeling, whatever you are thinking. It's easier to stay busy, to keep moving, to fill up all the empty spaces with noise and activity. And now? Now I'm sitting in the quiet with you, and it doesn't feel scary anymore. It feels—" He paused, searching for the word. "Safe." Something in my chest tightened at the way he said it, like safety was something rare and precious in his world. "I've never felt safe like this before," he continued, his voice barely audible. Without thinking, I reached up and touched his face, my fingers tracing the line of his cheek. His skin was warm and slightly rough with stubble, and he leaned into the touch like he was starving for it. "You're safe here," I said quietly. "As long as you want to be." Marcus's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. Instead, he turned his head slightly, pressing his lips to my palm in a kiss so gentle it barely qualified as contact. "I want to kiss you," he said, opening his eyes to look at me, "but I don't know if I should." My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what I'm doing. Because I'm supposed to be figuring out my life, not complicating yours. Because," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Because what?" "Because if I kiss you, I don't think I'll be able to leave." The honesty in his voice took my breath away. I thought about all the reasons this was complicated, all the ways it could go wrong. He was lost, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give him. He was supposed to be a temporary guest, not whatever this was becoming. But looking at him in the amber light, seeing the vulnerability in his dark eyes, I realized that I didn't care about the complications. I only cared about the way he was looking at me like I was something precious and unexpected. "Then don't leave," I said simply. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Marcus leaned forward slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to. I tilted my face up to meet him, and our lips touched in a kiss so soft it was barely there. Uncertain, questioning, and like neither of us was sure we were allowed to feel it. It lasted only a few seconds, but when we broke apart, something had changed between us. The air felt charged with possibility, with the acknowledgement of something we'd both been feeling but hadn't dared to name. "Was that okay?" Marcus asked, his forehead resting against mine. "More than okay," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. We stayed like that for a while, breathing the same air, our faces so close I could count his eyelashes. Then Marcus shifted, settling more comfortably against me, and I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. "I should probably go back to the couch," he said, but he made no move to get up. "Probably," I agreed, equally reluctant to let him go, but eventually we did separate. Marcus returned to the couch and I went back to my bed, but something had fundamentally shifted between us. We'd crossed a line and there was no going back. I lay in bed listening to him settle in for the night, and this time when sleep came, it was deep and dreamless. Petit. I woke to the smell of coffee and something that might have been pancakes. For a moment, I was disoriented. I lived alone, I didn't make elaborate breakfasts, and I certainly didn't wake up to the sound of someone humming in my kitchen. Then I remembered Marcus. I got dressed quickly and padded to the kitchen, where I found him standing at the stove, flipping what were indeed pancakes in my rarely used pan. He'd put on the t-shirt I'd given him, and his hair was sticking up in the back where he'd slept on it. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that was equal parts shy and pleased with himself. "I hope you don't mind. I found some pancake mix in your cupboard, and I thought I should make myself useful." "You don't have to make yourself useful," I said, but I was touched by the gesture. The kitchen smelled amazing, and there was something deeply appealing about having someone make breakfast in my space. "I wanted to," Marcus said simply. "Besides, I like cooking. I just don't get to do it very often." He served the pancakes on my good plates, the ones I saved for occasions that never seemed to come, and we ate at the small table by the window. The morning light was soft and golden, completely different from the amber darkness we'd shared the night before, but no less intimate. "These are incredible," I said after my first bite. "My mom's recipe," Marcus said. "She made them for me every Sunday morning when I was a kid. I haven't made them in years." There was something wistful in his voice that made me look at him more closely. "Do you miss it? Being close to your family?" Marcus considered the question, chewing thoughtfully. "I miss the idea of it. The Sunday morning pancakes, the sense of belonging somewhere, but the reality," he shrugged, "the reality is more complicated." "How so?" "They love me, but they don't really understand me. They want me to be successful in ways that make sense to them. Good job, nice house, wife and kids. They don't understand why I'd walk away from a six-figure salary to find myself." He made air quotes around the phrase. "They think I'm having some kind of breakdown." "Are you?" Marcus looked up at me, surprised by the directness of the question. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally having a breakthrough. I'm not sure there's much difference." We finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and afterward, Marcus insisted on doing the dishes while I got ready for work. It was a small thing, but there was something deeply intimate about the domesticity of it, him moving around my kitchen like he belonged there, humming softly under his breath. "What's your day like?" he asked as I gathered my things for work. "Pretty quiet. Reference desk until 3, then I'm helping with a literacy program for adults. Nothing too exciting." "It sounds perfect," Marcus said, and he seemed to mean it. "Mind if I walk with you? I should probably call about my car, see if the tow truck can meet me somewhere." We walked to the library together, and I found myself hyper-aware of his presence beside me, the way he matched his pace to mine, the way he looked around at the neighborhood with genuine interest rather than the polite disinterest of someone just passing through. "This is really nice," he said as we turned onto the tree-lined street where the library sat. "The whole area feels so peaceful." "It is. That's part of why I love it here." Marcus stopped walking and turned to look at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Last night, when you let me stay, was it just because you felt sorry for me?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I showed up at your door like a stray cat in the rain. It would have been the decent thing to do, helping me out, but last night when we—" He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "When we kissed. Was that pity too?" I stopped walking and turned to face him fully. We were standing in front of the library now, early morning commuters walking past us, but I didn't care who might be watching. "Marcus," I said firmly, "I didn't kiss you because I felt sorry for you. I kissed you because I wanted to, because sitting there with you felt like the most natural thing in the world." Something in his expression relaxed and he speedled. A real smile, warm and relieved. "Okay, good. I needed to know." "Will you be here when I get off work?" I asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to me. "If you want me to be." "I do." Marcus nodded, and there was something in his eyes that made my chest feel tight with unnamed emotion. "Then I'll be here." I went to work in a daze, barely able to concentrate on the usual rhythm of helping patrons and processing returns. My mind kept drifting back to Marcus, the way he'd looked in my kitchen that morning, domestic and comfortable, the shy pleasure in his smile when he'd served me breakfast, the kiss we'd shared in the amber darkness. Around noon, I got a text from him. "Car's fixed. Picked it up this morning. Still want me to stick around?" I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something like panic rise in my chest. He had his car back. He could leave any time he wanted. There was no practical reason for him to stay. I typed back, "Yes, if you want to." His response came quickly, "I want to." The relief I felt was disproportionate to the situation, but I didn't care. He could leave, but he was choosing to stay. That had to mean something. When I got home that afternoon, I found Marcus on my couch reading one of my books, the Mary Oliver collection he'd noticed the night before. He looked up when I came in, and his face lit up in a way that made something warm unfurl in my chest. "How was work?" he asked, closing the book and setting it aside. "Good. Quiet. How was your day?" I called my parents, let them know I was okay, took a walk around the neighborhood, spent some time thinking. He paused, studying my face. "I also went to the grocery store. I hope that's okay. I thought I could make dinner tonight." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, not just offering to cook, but actually going out and buying ingredients, touched me more than it probably should have. "You really don't have to." "I want to," Marcus said firmly. "Besides, I owe you about a dozen meals by now." He made pasta with a sauce that tasted like it had been simmering for hours, served with a salad that was far more elaborate than anything I would have made for myself. We ate by candlelight, his idea, not mine, and talked about everything and nothing. Books we'd loved, places we wanted to travel, the small moments that had shaped us into the people we'd become. "Tell me about the best day you've had in the past year," Marcus said over dessert, store-bought ice cream that somehow tasted better when shared. I thought about it, surprised by how difficult the question was. My days tended to blur together, pleasant but unremarkable. "There was this day last spring," I said finally. I was walking home from work and I passed this old man sitting on a bench. He looked lost, so I stopped to ask if he needed help. Turns out he was fine, just enjoying the weather, but we ended up talking for over an hour about his garden, his late wife, the books he was reading. It was. I paused, trying to find the right words. It was just this perfect moment of human connection with a complete stranger. Marcus was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's very you," he said softly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, most people would have kept walking, but you stopped. You saw someone who might need help, and you cared enough to ask." He reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "It's one of the things I always admired about you, even back in college, the way you notice people, really see them." "What about you?" I asked, deflecting from the compliment. "Best day of your year?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "Yesterday," he said finally. "Showing up at your door, having dinner with you, talking until almost dawn. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I felt like myself." The honesty in his voice made something ache in my chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been performing for so long, being the successful consultant, the dutiful son, the guy who has it all together, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist. To be with someone who sees you and doesn't need you to be anything other than who you are." We cleaned up the dishes together again, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that felt like we'd been doing it for years. And when we settled on the couch afterward, it felt natural for Marcus to sit close to me, natural for me to rest my hand on his knee, natural for us to exist in the same space without needing to fill every moment with words. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said eventually. "Always. Are you happy? I mean, really happy with your life here?" I considered the question seriously. "Most of the time, yes. It's not the life I thought I wanted when I was 22, but it's the life that fits me. It's quiet and predictable and maybe a little lonely sometimes, but it's mine." "And now?" "Now what?" Marcus turned to look at me, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Now that I'm here, does it still fit?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was harsh, but because it was so perfectly aimed at something I'd been trying not to think about. Having Marcus here had changed something fundamental about the shape of my life. The quiet felt different when it was shared. The routines felt richer when there was someone else to witness them. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm not ready to find out what it feels like without you." Marcus leaned closer, and this time when he kissed me, there was nothing uncertain about it. It was soft and warm and tasted like the wine we'd shared with dinner, and when we broke apart, I felt like I was floating. "I'm not ready either," he said against my lips. We stayed on the couch for hours, talking and kissing and simply existing in each other's space. At some point, we ended up lying on the floor side by side, staring at the ceiling, our pinkies touching in the space between us. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, his voice drowsy in the darkness. "You," I said without hesitation. "This. How strange it is that 24 hours ago I didn't even know you were in town, and now." "Now what?" I turned my head to look at him, taking in his profile in the dim light from the window. "Now it feels like you've always been here." Marcus smiled, and I could see it even in the darkness. "I feel like I've been looking for this place my whole life without knowing what I was looking for." "This place? This feeling, this sense of belonging, I guess, of being known." He turned to look at me. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." We fell asleep there on the floor, wrapped in the blanket from the couch, our bodies curved toward each other like parentheses around something precious. The days that followed took on a rhythm I hadn't expected. Marcus would make coffee in the morning while I got ready for work. We'd walk to the library together, and he'd spend his days exploring the city, reading in coffee shops, taking long walks by the river. When I got home, he'd be there, sometimes cooking, sometimes reading, sometimes just sitting by the window with a thoughtful expression that suggested he'd been doing some serious thinking. In the evenings, we'd cook together, eat by candlelight, talk until late into the night. We kissed sometimes, soft, exploratory kisses that felt like questions we were still learning to ask, But mostly we just existed in each other's space, growing more comfortable with the strange intimacy of shared routines. He was never meant to stay, but somewhere between his silence and his smile, I started building a space for him inside me. Not consciously, not deliberately, but the way a plant grows toward light, naturally, inevitably, without choice. It was on the fourth night that something shifted. We were in the kitchen again. We seemed to gravitate there in the quiet hours, drawn by the amber light and the sense of privacy it provided. Marcus was leaning against the counter, and I was standing across from him, and we were talking about nothing in particular when he suddenly went quiet. "What is it?" I asked. Marcus was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between wonder and fear, and "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my heart stop and then start again, faster than before. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," I said, surprised by how easy it was to say, how right it felt. Marcus crossed the space between us in 2 steps, and then his hands were on my face and his lips were on mine, and this kiss was different from all the others, deeper, more urgent, full of all the things we'd been holding back. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I'm scared," Marcus said, his forehead resting against mine. "Of what?" "Of how much I want this, of how much I want to stay." He pulled back to look at me. "I came here with nothing, running from a life that didn't fit, and now I'm terrified that I'm going to mess this up somehow." "You're not going to mess anything up. How can you be so sure?" I thought about it, trying to find the right words. "Because this isn't about running away anymore. This is about running towards something, and that's different." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "What if I stayed?" he said finally. "Not just for another night or another week. What if I stayed and we figured out what this is together?" The question sent a jolt of something, fear and hope and longing all tangled together, through my chest. "Is that what you want?" "More than anything," Marcus said without hesitation. "But I need to know. Is it what you want too?" I looked at him standing there in my kitchen wearing my clothes, his hair mussed from sleep, his eyes soft with vulnerability and hope. I thought about the life I'd built here, quiet and contained and safe. I thought about how he'd changed the shape of that life simply by existing in it, how much richer and fuller everything felt when he was there to witness it. "Yes," I said. "It's what I want too." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was like sunrise, slow and warm and transformative. He kissed me again, softer this time, and I could taste the relief in it, the joy, the promise of something new beginning. But wanting something and actually doing it are different things, as we discovered over the next few days. Marcus started making calls to his parents, to his friends, to various bureaucratic entities that needed to know about his change of address. I found myself watching him pace around my apartment with his phone pressed to his ear, and despite everything we'd said to each other, I felt a flutter of anxiety. He was making it real, making plans, and with reality came complications I hadn't fully considered. "My parents want to meet you," Marcus said after hanging up from a particularly long conversation. He looked nervous, running his hand through his hair in the gesture I was starting to recognize as his tell. "Do you want them to meet me?" "Eventually, yes, but not yet. I need to figure out how to explain this to them first. They're still processing the fact that I quit my job and moved across the country. Adding a boyfriend to the mix might be too much all at once." The word boyfriend sent a little thrill through me, even in the context of complications and parental concerns. "Are you out to them?" I asked. Marcus grimaced. "Sort of. I mean, they know I've dated men before, but they've always treated it like a phase, something I'd grow out of when I met the right woman and settled down." He sat down heavily on the couch. "They're not hostile about it exactly, just willfully oblivious." I sat down beside him, close enough to offer comfort without crowding him. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. We can take it as slowly as you need to." Marcus looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. "How are you so patient, so understanding about all of this?" "Because I care about you," I said simply. And because I'd rather have you here, complicated as it is, than not have you at all. That night, we made love for the first time. It was gentle and tentative, and nothing like what I'd imagined. Marcus was nervous, I was nervous, and we spent more time laughing at our awkwardness than anything else. But there was something beautiful in that, too, in the way we learned each other slowly, carefully, with infinite tenderness. Afterward, we lay tangled together in my narrow bed, and Marcus traced lazy patterns on my chest with his fingertip. "I've never felt this before," he said quietly. "What?" "This sense of rightness, like everything I've done, everywhere I've been, was just leading me here, to you." He looked up at me. "Is that crazy?" "If it is, then I'm crazy too." Marcus smiled and settled his head back on my chest. "Good. I like the idea of being crazy together." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of my life. Marcus found a job at a nonprofit downtown, nothing like the high-powered consulting work he'd left behind, but something that seemed to energize him in a way his old career never had. We fell into routines that felt both new and ancient: morning coffee and newspaper reading, evening walks by the river, lazy Sunday mornings in bed. But I could tell something was weighing on him. He'd get quiet sometimes, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression that suggested he was wrestling with something he wasn't ready to share. It came to a head on a Thursday evening in late October. I came home from work to find Marcus packing. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart immediately jumping to my throat. Marcus looked up from the small suitcase he'd been filling with the clothes he'd gradually accumulated. His face was pale and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping. "I have to go back to Chicago for a few days," he said. "There are some things I need to take care of. Lease agreements, stuff in storage, loose ends I've been putting off." "Okay," I said, though something in his tone suggested there was more to it than that. "When do you leave?" "Tonight. I've got a red-eye flight." Marcus zipped the suitcase closed and set it by the door, then turned to face me. "I'll be back by the weekend." "Marcus." I stepped closer, studying his face. "What's really going on?" For a moment I thought he might deflect, give me another practical explanation about lease agreements and storage units. Then his shoulders sagged, and he sank down onto the couch. "My parents want to meet you," he said quietly. They're they're planning to come here next month for Thanksgiving." "That's good, isn't it? You said you wanted them to meet me eventually." I do, but—" Marcus ran his hands over his face. "They called yesterday. They want to know where I'm living, what my plans are, whether I'm getting my life back on track, and I realized I don't know how to answer those questions." I sat down beside him, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to crowd him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what am I doing here? I showed up at your door with nothing, no plan, no idea what I wanted beyond a place to sleep for the night. And now I'm, what? Playing house, pretending that this is a real life instead of just an extended vacation from reality?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "Is that what you think this is? Playing house?" Marcus looked at me and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Love and fear and uncertainty all tangled together. "I don't know what this is. That's the problem." "It's real," I said firmly. "Whatever this is between us, however it started, it's real now." "But is it sustainable? I have no money saved, no career prospects, no 5-year plan. I'm 30 years old and I'm starting over from scratch." Marcus stood up and began pacing the small living room. "What kind of foundation is that for a relationship?" I watched him pace, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "Are you having second thoughts?" Marcus stopped and looked at me, and the anguish in his expression answered the question before he could speak. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being selfish, dragging you into my mess when I don't even know what I want my life to look like." "Maybe that's okay," I said. "Maybe not having a 5-year plan isn't the end of the world." "Easy for you to say. You have a job, a home, a life that makes sense. I'm just drifting." The unfairness of it stung. "You think my life is so simple?" You think I haven't had doubts and fears and moments of wondering if I'm wasting my potential? I stood up, suddenly too agitated to sit still. The difference is I've learned to be okay with uncertainty, to find meaning in small things instead of grand gestures. And what if that's not enough for me? The question hung in the air between us, sharp and painful. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break exactly, but develop a hairline fracture that might widen if I wasn't careful. Then maybe you should go, I said quietly. Marcus stared at me, and I could see that he hadn't expected that response. What? If you're not sure this is what you want, if you think you're just drifting, then maybe you should go figure out what you do want, before you hurt both of us more than necessary. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Marcus picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob, not turning around. This isn't what I want, he said, his voice barely audible. Then why are you leaving? Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with something that might have been tears. Because I'm terrified that if I stay, I'll just keep hurting you, keep disappointing you, keep failing to be the person you deserve. I wanted to go to him, to wrap my arms around him and tell him he was wrong, that he was exactly the person I wanted. But something held me back. Pride, maybe, or the fear that if I begged him to stay, he'd only resent me for it later. You're not failing me, I said instead. But you're right about one thing. You do need to figure out what you want, and you can't do that here with me, not if you're going to spend the whole time questioning whether it's real. Marcus turned then, and I could see the tears in his eyes. I don't want to lose you. Then don't. For a moment, I thought he might drop the suitcase, might cross the room and kiss me and tell me he was being an idiot. Instead, he opened the door. I'll call you, he said without looking at me. Okay. And then he was gone, and I was alone in my apartment, which suddenly felt too quiet and too empty, and exactly the way it had felt before he'd arrived, like a life that was small and contained and missing something essential. He didn't call, not that night, not the next day, not over the weekend when he was supposed to return. I told myself he was probably busy dealing with whatever loose ends had taken him back to Chicago. I told myself he needed time to think, to process whatever he was feeling. I told myself a lot of things, but none of them made the silence any easier to bear. By the following Wednesday, I was starting to get angry. Not just hurt, though I was definitely hurt, but genuinely angry at the way he'd left, at the cowardice of his exit, at the fact that he could spend weeks in my bed, in my life, telling me he loved me, and then disappear without so much as a text message. I was in the middle of helping a patron find a book on local history when my phone buzzed. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe it was Marcus finally calling to explain himself, but when I looked at the screen, it was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and finished helping the patron. When I had a free moment, I listened to the message. Hi, this is Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister. I got your number from his phone. Look, I know this is probably weird, but I think we need to talk. Can you call me back? It's about Marcus. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. Sarah answered on the first ring. Thank you for calling back, she said without preamble. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm worried about my brother, and I think you might be the only person who can help. What's wrong? Where is he? He's here in Chicago. Has been for over a week, but he's not okay. He's been staying in this awful hotel room, barely eating, not sleeping. When I went to see him yesterday, he looked like he hadn't showered in days. My anger evaporated, replaced by concern so sharp it